annual review report for the UK, which shows that our current trajectory to net zero is one of 3 degrees Celsius at the moment for global warming, which is not really where we want to be. We should aim for 1.5 degree, as everyone knows. And the second report, which was the climate risk assessment report, signals that the risks to the UK have significantly increased since the last report 5 years ago. And more worryingly, the policies the government has put in place are falling far short of addressing the current, let alone the future risks, which include not only the direct climate impacts, such as floods and droughts, but the ability for businesses to raise finance. So knowing that our sector has such a big role, the manufacturing sector, to play in achieving net zero, and that risk also comes opportunity to become the solution for the future low economy, it's clear that we have to raise our ambition. There's a lot more to do, and it has to be done a lot faster, and the government is counting on industry. So basically communicating and reporting and taking action is really important. So last time we learned where our scope, in previous workshops, we learned where our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions may come from. And today we can focus on why and where to report and communicate your net zero ambitions and goals. So I'm now going to run a quick poll, which I'm going to, oops, sorry. Something's happened, sorry. My screen's completely disappeared. Right, poll.
I'm going to launch it for you.
Yeah, can you launch it?
Yeah,
please?
I've launched it for you.
Well, I think I know what I've done. So can everybody see the poll?
Yeah, everyone's people are responding.
Perfect.
To the poll.
Yeah. So the question, yeah. Question is, are you currently publicly or planning to disclosing your net zero ambitions and progress? So that should be an easy one for you.
Okay, I think everybody's just about answered the questions. A couple more still to come. Okay, so I'm going to end the polling for you, Brigitte, because obviously if you're not able to do it.
I can't see it.
Okay,
So,
I'm going to end the polling right now and share the results. So you've got 72% at yes and 28% at no.
Well, that's quite a good proportion of us, so really encouraging. So let's get going into the presentation. So we hand over to Dan Hume from Inspired Energy.
Thanks, Brigitte. Would you mind putting the screen, the slides on screen for everyone, please?
Yes, they are. So I hope. Can you see?
Yeah, here we go.
Okay.
So, morning, everyone. For those who are watching on demand in the future, talking to the future now, I noticed that we started the recording a little after the introduction, so just wanted to capture the fact that you may know us previously as ENCM, Energy and Carbon Management. Back in 2018, we joined the Inspired group of companies, but in the last couple of months, we're just merging that and rebranding into Inspired Energy PLC. So just to dismiss any confusion. If you've already been speaking to us in the past, we're all the same people, we're just changing the colour scheme. So you'll probably notice the slides have a slightly different look today, thanks to our marketing team. Okay, so let's get cracking. I wanted to start with a bit of a recap and revisit of some of the previous sessions that some of you may have watched live or on demand. Simply put, there is a number of ways of achieving net zero, and it can be quite confusing. Working from left to right on the chart on screen, we typically recommend that you start by measuring and understanding your carbon footprint. Fundamentally, it's about collecting your data and converting it into CO2 emissions. You can include all 3 scopes of emissions, though most that we speak to on a regular basis are reviewing scope 1 and 2 at the moment. For those of you that don't know the scopes, I'll come into them in a little bit more detail than they've been in the previous sessions. By creating your carbon footprint, you start to understand and create a bit of a baseline, a starting position, and what we see as the foundation for your actions that you take next. Once you've understood your carbon footprint and you've got your baseline in place, we'd recommend setting a target. Now, some businesses may stretch that to science-based targets if they include scope 3 emissions in their carbon footprint. But ultimately, you want it to, understand what can you achieve, when do you need to achieve it by, and what's driving that. So is it a customer-driven target? Is it a parent company-driven target, or is it actually from maybe investors within the business? Once you've set your target, understand where your opportunities are to reduce your carbon footprint. So some of these will be born out of compliance schemes like Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting, or ESOS, Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme. Some of it could just be through site surveys, so starting to understand what your opportunities are to reduce energy waste, reduce carbon emissions, and potentially even generate your own on-site as well to remove that carbon emission. Once you've started taking action, we recommend that you start then reporting on your progress, and reporting and communicating is the main topic of today's session. So it's not just compliance where you'd be reporting. Some people choose to do so voluntary basis, and as we've just seen, 72% of the people in the poll have already started disclosing their journey to net zero. And typically that, then it's a cyclical continuous improvement program. So using the savings that you generate from the quick wins and the early implementation, the low cost actions, to then hopefully support funding of maybe larger capital heavy projects in the future. We're making sure that you're regularly reviewing your strategy to keep it in line with what your customers, supply chain are expecting, what your business goals are, and the marketplace's sensitivity as well to carbon reduction. Once you've reduced and removed all the carbon emissions that you can, it's inevitable in some companies that you won't be able to achieve net zero just through reduction and avoidance. You will have to do some offsetting in order to achieve that position of net zero emissions. To many of you, it's not a linear journey. So some of you have already started this process. Some of you have jumped a few steps ahead, for example. So some of you may have solar panels on the roof, but actually you may have missed some low cost or no cost opportunities. Well, that doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's all progress in the bank. And today, hopefully, we'll help you understand how and why to communicate your success. Next slide, please. So recap number 2, just covering what the different scopes of emissions are, just to give a bit of context when we talk later on. So greenhouse gas emissions are categorized into 3 groups or scopes. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol is a widely used international accounting and reporting tool. Scope 1 covers your direct emissions from owned or controlled sources. So typically burning gas at site to create heat or steam or for heating. Some fugitive gas from any refrigeration plant that you may have on site. Scope 2 then covers indirect emissions from things like the generation of purchased electricity. So not where you're generating it on site, but where it's generated in a power station and pushed through the grid to your meter. Likewise, if you're buying steam or heat from another source that's generated off site, comes onto site, that would be your scope 2. And any So then you look at scope 3, you've got upstream and downstream emissions. 15 different categories and numerous different subcategories as well. Can get very complex very quickly. The way, I guess the narrative that we've been trying to push out, certainly through the membership and any people that we've been speaking to, is that if everyone starts to look after their scope 1 and 2 emissions, so things that you can really control yourself within your business, then scope 3 will start to piece together naturally. Anyone in your supply chain, you become part of their scope 3 emissions if you're supplying a product to them or buying a product from them, for argument's sake. So it'll become much easier in the future once everyone starts measuring their scope 1 and 2 for everyone to put the final pieces of the puzzle together in scope 3. Next slide, please. So today we really wanted to labour the point of communicating and reporting the success that many of you have already made, but maybe not communicated effectively, and just try and give a bit of context about the different types and forms of communication. So one thing that we've certainly seen is that the marketing mix is changing slightly now. So what people have previously marketed product predominantly, it's now becoming a bit more focused around environmental impact of the product or the business. And ultimately, what are you doing to reduce your impact on the environment? What steps have you already taken? We've already referred to the poll, so 72% of you on the call have already started doing so, which is great news. It'd be good to get some feedback on what you've been doing. We see communication not only as external disclosures, so putting things out in the public domain, but also how you communicate internally to your employees, and arguably that's potentially more important in order to get to the end goal. Next slide, please. So communicating externally, we see there's 4 typical reasons why you'd want to or have to communicate to people or businesses outside of your own organisation. Mandatory, simply put, because you have to, so you have to comply with some kind of legislation. Public statements, so for PR reasons, making public statements about what your business has done or the environmental impact of your product and why it's better than maybe one of your competitors. Voluntary reasons, so it makes good business sense to do so, kind of links in with PR reasons. And then supply chain, so because your customers are asking for it already, or potentially you want to get ahead of the curve and give yourself a bit of a differentiator in your market space. Now we're going to go into detail on each in the following section. Next slide, please. So mandatory, we've carved it into 3. So mandatory, the must-dos. For those of you who are captured by compliance schemes, you'll know what they are already, and we've covered them in previous sessions, so I don't want to labour that point today. But the next piece of government legislation that's coming into play from April 2022 is TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, bit of a gobful. Essentially, it provides an important framework for companies to report about their impact of climate change on their operations. So that in turn will help investors evaluate the risk of investing in that business. We, as Inspired Energy PLC, have had to go through this process ourselves and have done so ahead of the curve. One, so that we can understand what we're potentially going to be helping our customers with, but also so that we're, from a competitive perspective, we're ahead. One example of part of creating that TCFD analysis was to understand the climate risk on our business. And essentially the output of that is that some of our office locations potentially could be underwater in the next 30 years if we don't do something to reduce our impact on the environment, and everyone else does. So it's all related to climate change. Voluntary, so the choose to do's rather than the must do's. So many businesses are already complying with SECA, but on a voluntary basis. So because it creates a bit of a foundation or a reporting framework in order for you to understand your emissions and then disclose them. Some people are doing that out of choice, which is great. Public statements, it's a voluntary choice. Many of you will see that large businesses have already made commitments to reach net zero, certainly ahead of the government target of 2050. We cover that a bit later. But in some sectors, this is creating a competitive race to net zero. This, of course, is voluntary and it supports competitive advantage and I guess, improving the image of your business. Examples of big companies that have done so are people like Sainsbury's, Virgin Media, and then more linked to manufacturing sector, Ibstock Brick. Roadmaps are the most common form of credible voluntary disclosure. It portrays, I guess, a business's understanding of their position and how your business plans to achieve that net zero status. Make UK themselves are embarking on this journey as we speak. We're actually supporting them to define their own net zero strategy and roadmap. I think Brigitte will come on to that a little later today. You may also want to voluntarily disclose to improve your image and attract new talent into the organisation. Being on some of the regional board meetings recently with Make UK, we understand some of the key challenges that manufacturers are facing in the UK at the moment is attracting and retaining good staff and qualified staff of value. I would expect most of you as manufacturers have already got environmental policies of some variety, either in line with environmental permits that you require for site, or maybe it's just a customer pressure. Maybe consider updating those, but ultimately they are typically voluntary disclosures. You don't have to show them on your website or out within your supply chain unless it's requested. And then we've put ISO standards in as voluntary because you can choose to do the ISO standard and achieve that standard. Obviously, once you've got it, you've gone then comply with the metrics of that scheme. But typical standards are ISO 14001 and 50001, so the environmental standard and the energy management standard. And then supply chain, so what we potentially think is the biggest part of communicating externally anyway. We think, at least for the core membership of Make UK, that supply chain pressure is probably the key driver in needing to communicate what your net zero plans are. Many government contracts now are starting to show heavy marks in favour of those that are communicating or able to demonstrate what they've done to reduce their impact on the environment. So any of you fortunate or unfortunate enough to be bidding for government contracts as part of your work or part of your supply chain, you probably will have seen that already. And that's coming into private sectors as well. Also in supply chain, it's to, I guess, satisfy the customer's demands where they're looking at sourcing more sustainable options or more environmentally friendly materials or products in order to sell to their customers, where you'll form part of a long supply chain. So being able to prove that you're the best partner or supplier of that required product from an environmental standpoint is obviously going to aid you in normal business every day today. It could also, I guess, start to then create a bit of demand or competition within your supply chain to make the first steps, which in itself will support your business long term with reducing supply chain emissions. And the ultimate goal in reality is to retain what you've got now customer wise and then hopefully grow it as well with attracting new customers. Next slide, please. So staff engagement, communicating internally, staff engagement's the top one on this list. So your own staff are fundamentally key to the success in you driving the change and achieving carbon reduction. Many people have focused on communicating externally, but actually maybe forgotten about communicating internally, all the good things that you're doing. In order to gain their engagement, you need to be communicating internally what your plans are, but also seeking some of their input to get some engagement before you define your overall strategy and start to chalk it up. Potentially making people carbon or energy champions in their area gives them responsibility and a feeling of involvement. I know many of you probably already do that. Some of you will have formed sustainability teams whereby it's part of a finance director's role, part of a procurement person's role, part of a HSE's role. And you group together and you may do weekly or monthly updates on what challenges you're facing, what things are in the pipeline, what opportunities there are. So there's already things that are happening. You could also potentially consider looking at, I guess, loose environmental KPIs as part of your staff's personal development and review. So not maybe linking it to a financial incentive, but certainly putting something in there as part of their personal development plan to help them understand a bit more about what their impact is on the business's wider environmental impact and how they can reduce or support what you're trying to achieve. Most importantly, engaging your staff, you need to make sure they understand what you're trying to change and why, and what you're trying to reduce, and how their input has a fundamental impact on that success of it happening. I guess consider disclosing to them what your business's carbon footprint is, and try and make it relevant to them, maybe by using anecdotes such as our carbon footprint as a business equals, I don't know, the carbon footprint of all of your homes for the next 5 years, but just in 1 year. You know, try and make it something relatable to them, so that they get a feel for, you know, the size of the problem or the size of the impact that your business has. And then that feeds into corporate social responsibility, or environmental social governance, CSR or ESG for short. So it supports staff retention, supports attracting new talent, as we've already highlighted on the RABs. That's a point of discussion at the moment. Certainly where younger generations are concerned, they consider themselves more socially and environmentally aware, certainly of their own personal impact. That's probably the PC version of calling them woke. And yeah, the feedback on the RABs has been that many people are struggling to attract or find the right people to their business. So this certainly could support, if not attract them, but be a key differentiator if someone's got a couple of options as to where they want to be employed next. Try and help you secure those candidates. And fundamentally, it's a no cost or very little cost action that you can take by communicating internally, but behaviourally, you know, it could have a significant impact on the success of your strategy, and really just trying to embed it as part of the business's culture. So before we make a purchasing decision, are we considering the environmental impact of that piece of kit or that raw material or that partner that we're looking at? Before we put new policies in with HR or training and development, have we considered putting in an environmental part of training and development for new starters, or regular updates for existing staff members? You know, just trying to knit all of the different pieces together that could potentially support you to reduce your carbon emissions further. Next slide, please. So if we recap on, I think it was the first session, once you've considered internal and external communication, what's the motivation to communicate this effectively? We did a survey. So if you look at some of the results, gives some context and demonstrates the importance of effective communication. The survey simply asked why a business is looking to improve their green credentials. The answers were around business reputation, customer expectation, mandatory reporting, and to drive reduction through engagement. 51% of people questioned said it was down to business reputation, so relating to their image. 41% related it to customer expectations, so supply chain pressure that they're feeling. Interestingly though, 26% said that it was compliance or because they had to, quite a small proportion. So more businesses are committing to net zero for reasons other than compliance, certainly than those that are having to do so through just compliance only. And just since we started this series at the end of February, I think it was, we've already seen more pressure on the members, certainly from the ones that we've been speaking to, either from investors, parent groups of their companies, or their customers. And unfortunately now, noise for the sake of noise is just not going to be enough. So not just the fluffy marketing stuff that you push out. Supply chain pressure is coming. And if you're not already feeling it, your ability to be able to communicate, it's definitely going to have a massive impact on the success of what you're doing, certainly around retaining and winning new business. You've got to understand your drivers before you develop your communication plan, so that it satisfies the needs of those on the receiving end of the communication that you're making. There's no point in talking about, you know, one certain topic when actually everyone wants to hear about something else. So really getting a feel for your audience before you start to create your content is massive. Next slide, please. We mentioned earlier on that there's been a number of large businesses that have already made public communications around their commitments and what they're doing to reduce their impact on the environment. As you'd expect, these are typical household names. There are a number of manufacturers that have done so as well, but it's just easier to talk about names that people are probably familiar with. By disclosing their intentions in public, it's driving accountability. So what you say you're going to do, it pretty much has to happen if it's in the public eye, otherwise it's seen as a failure. And whilst we recognise these commitments are directly in the public eye, so people like end users like Morrison's, where people go in to shop for their groceries, inevitably that's more than likely going to form part of your supply chain somewhere. So if you're making products for these people, or arguably they are delivering your products around the country, if it's people like DHL, for argument's sake. Next slide, please. So what can you do next, and what the action that you should start taking? So on a day, then figure out what you can do to reduce that. So scope out your realistic opportunities, act, get stuck in and make the changes, take some action, and then communicate this progress. And
Okay, sorry about that. Dan, you seem to have a problem with your speaker at the moment. Not sure if Adam is there. If Adam, you want to take over?
Yeah, I'll pick up the last slide or so then. So in principle, you scope your realistic opportunities. You then have to take action on those opportunities, and then crucially, as we've been talking about here, shout about your success. And then you're back to the start of the cycle. So it's understand your position again, and then scope your new realistic opportunities, take action, shout about success. And that links back to the first slides that we talked about in the very first session and that Dan recapped at the beginning of today. And that overlays very neatly, next slide, please, with the toolkit that we've developed. Dan, do you want to pick up?
Yeah, sorry, Adam, I don't know what happened there. So yeah, the Net Zero Toolkit has been developed, I guess, in line with the brief that Make UK gave us about 12 months ago now, as to how can our members start this journey, and how can they have some kind of structured framework to achieve some outputs. So this is how we help the Make UK members. A number of you on the call may have already spoken to us about this. A number of you may not have. So for the benefit of those that haven't, start by understanding your carbon footprint. So we can create a carbon footprint for your business, including all 3 scopes of emissions if you want to get really technical, but typically it's scope 1 and 2. Once you've understood your starting point, we then come out and survey the sites. We do a net zero survey through our optimization team, and they'd look at, everything from energy reduction, processes, behavioral changes, things that cost nothing or very little, right through to big investment things like changing or decarbonising the heating, turning it from gas to electric sources, for argument's sake, recovering waste heat from some of your production processes if you have them, and then looking at potential generation on the roof or in the car park through solar or wind. The output of that is a report detailing a list of opportunities, so your shopping list of carbon reduction opportunities, what the typical cost to implement them, and therefore what the return on investment would be, but more importantly, what chunk of carbon you can take out of your footprint by taking up that action. Then obviously we can help you implement that. So would it be sourcing suppliers to provide solar panels and just vetting their proposals to make sure that they're not fudging the numbers to make it look more credible, through to helping you and engage the staff and do some awareness training or some engagement coaching sessions, and then tracking and reporting. So updating your carbon footprint on an annual basis, making sure you're aware of the changes or the impact that those actions have had, and then being able to, I guess, manipulate that information into something marketable. So how do you then communicate that both externally and internally on a regular enough basis to get the outcome that you're looking for? So we're also working with Make UK themselves on their roadmap to net zero. So I guess the services that we offer aren't necessarily limited to this, but in line with the subject matter of net zero, that's where we're supporting the member base. Next slide, please. Is it frozen on my screen? Am I having internet problems again?
Yes,
I
it's
think
the
so.
last slide.
Well, anyway, we've finished my session
Yes.
now. I just want to thank everyone for the time.
So if I
fine.
may,
If there's any questions, please do submit them in the chat on here so that everyone can benefit from the answers that we give. Go on.
We have got a couple of questions in the chat, Dan, if you want to go over them now.
I'm here to
maybe,
speak.
maybe
If
I
anyone
should
wants
make a couple of
to
comments.
ask any questions directly to us, please do so through makeuk@inspiredenergy.co.uk. We are offering free consultations to any of the Make UK members as a value add for being a member of Make UK. So there's no obligation. It's just a chat, really, just to understand what your position is, maybe give some pointers. If at that point, you know, we can help you to do it yourself, great. Likewise, if you feel that you've maybe not got the resource or expertise internally, we'd be, you know, happy to support you on that journey to net zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and sorry, Dawn, before we go ahead with the second poll, I'd just like to make a couple of comments on the roadmap and on what Dan said about the TFCD as well. So concerning the TFCD, it seems, so we had a presentation yesterday by the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, who announced that well, there's a roadmap for the government, and Dan mentioned that by 2022 it will become mandatory, but that's just for large companies and LLPs, but non-listed large companies and LLPs on top of the listed companies. But by 2025 it should concern everybody, so it's going to definitely happen. They're also announcing a TFCD not just on finance, but also another one on social injustice. That's interesting. And also there is going to be a new international standards board created in summer, which will work on a standards which will be on a climate first approach. So all this is about finance. So it's really spreading very, very fast and internationally as well. So things can become more harmonized and compatible. So on the roadmap, yes, we are working, well, Inspired Energy is helping us to build our sectoral roadmap for manufacturers. So the timing of this, there should be a very rough high level, let's say, roadmap with major milestones by just ahead of the COP by end of October. And we are, for example, faced with other roadmaps being built. For example, the British Retail Council has announced in their roadmap that they wanted all their products to be net zero by 2040. So we're going to have to decide whether this is possible at all or not. If we think about the steel, for example, that they use for their shelves, or, you know, it's all products, all retail products. So so it's really important to be starting to work on that. And also we're going to be using it as a tool for negotiation with the government on policy needs for our sector, of course. So I think, Dawn, now it's the time to run the second poll, isn't it?
Okay.
So, I still got the same problem as before. I don't know why. Let me just see.
Okay. That one.
No, I can't do it. I don't know what I did.
Well, I think technology is just having a go at all of us today, Brigitte.
Not able to just stop.
We've shared.
Oh, I see. Oh.
We need to get into the polling too, and it's just not allowing me.
Whilst we're trying to sort that out, would Dan and Adam maybe be able to answer a question from Dan?
Yeah,
about,
exactly.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to tackle the first one, certainly.
Brilliant.
So the answer, Dan, to your question about emissions being minimal, yes, in theory, yes. But in practice, what you would actually do is you would use a spend-based approach to estimate your value chain emissions. And then you establish what would be the main hotspots, so and areas of influence. Then you obtain better and more accurate data on those specific issues. So you would be aware of all of them in theory, but you then sort of really drill into the ones that are causing you the biggest, what are causing you the biggest concern. But this is what makes Scope 3 such a large undertaking potentially. Answer your question.
Good. I've got the polling able to launch now, so if you just bear with me. Would you like me to do it now, Brigitte? Okay. There we go. So hopefully everybody can see that. You can scroll down through the questions. Everybody able to see them? If you'd like to start answering those questions on the screen.
Apologies, I was on mute, so I can start that again. So first question, I guess you've all already answered. Why are you publicly disclosing your net zero ambitions and progress? The second one is more detail on, for those who are disclosing, on which initiatives you're committing to. So it's really interesting for us to understand what you're doing. And you have the choice at the bottom to choose none at all or other. So if you're disclosing to another initiative, please write it down in the chat. Then to whom do you communicate your net zero ambitions and progress? So that your suppliers, customers, capital providers, employees, other, or you don't plan to communicate. And are you, yes. And finally, the last question is, are you interested in discussing net zero in a free session with Inspired Energy?
Okay, we're waiting for any more to answer any of these questions.
Confirm how many participants are actually answering, Dawn, in total.
So we've got 23 out of 32 have answered here. So give it a couple more seconds. Sure. And the polling and share the results with you. Hopefully you can see those results.
I can't see them. Can everybody see them?
Okay, so are you able to see them, Dan? Do you want to go through the results, or would you like me to read them out? So at the moment, Question 1, we've got 4% because of compliance, 30% voluntary, 48% a bit of both, and 17% are not currently doing or planning to.
Yeah.
Question.
If you're, sorry, go on, Dom.
No, that's fine. If you want me to go on to question 2.
I'll go for it. So if you're disclosing your net zero ambitions and progress on a voluntary basis, which are the following initiatives you're committing to? 13% click climate change agreement or min-met, 26% on CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, 17% science-based targets. Interestingly, no one clicked B Corp. 22% on Race to Zero, so that includes a number of different initiatives. 17% on SME Climate Hub, and then some others, 4%. Hopefully they'll put in the chat, but 30% said none at all at the moment. Question 3, to whom do you communicate or want to communicate your net zero ambitions and progress? 57% said my suppliers, 87% said my customers, 39% said their investors, 83% said employees, which is great, and then a couple of others in others or they don't plan to communicate. And then thankfully, just under half of you want to have a quick chat with us about net zero.
Oh, that's really good results, actually, and reflecting that most people are actually disclosing or planning to disclose voluntarily. 30%, that's the majority. I mean, it's only still 30% plus a bit of both. So that is quite good, and not just because of compliance, which is only 4% of you. So that goes towards what Dan was saying in his in your drivers. Then for the other initiatives, I don't have any comments in particular, except that Race to Zero, which is actually an accelerator, is really good to see that 22%, and the SME Climate Hub as well, which is part of it, that's 17%. That's quite a good chunk. So it's really, really great to see. And then hopefully for the ones who don't plan, well, maybe we've inspired you or motivated you to think about it. And then of course the employees, the next question about the employees, that's really good. Not so many people, it's clearly driven by the customers as well, and a little bit by the suppliers and the lenders. Yeah, interesting. So thank you for that.
Indeed, there's some interesting questions that have come in around disclosure. So Dan is asking what the advantages are, and then excuse the pronunciation of your name, is it Ord? Is wondering which one you would recommend when it comes down to the disclosing route sort of initiative. Are there any comments to that from the team?
I think Dan's having some technical problems, so I think I'll step back in. So let's try and order them. There's a nice question about from Dan as well further up about executive remuneration being linked to environmental performance as well, which I think is all quite interesting. So let's see. Let me try and tackle those backwards then. So we've got the advantage of disclosing in one of the initiatives, I think, is primarily that it formalizes and gives context for the declaration that you're making. I think that's the primary the primary reason that you might do it through an initiative. I think what's really important is, regardless of whether you use an initiative or not, is that you create a clear baseline, that you measure yourself against that baseline consistently, and that you're able to demonstrate a path. And I think as I say, the formal initiatives provide that context and pathway, and in some cases a methodology for getting to an endpoint. The downside of them, of course, is that they are potentially relatively labour intensive in a number of cases and are quite prescriptive, and actually can become a bit of a millstone if you're not careful. So I think it's important that you find the right balance between the formality and the structure and the kind of, as I say, the context in an international capacity, but also not causing your organisation to be encumbered, I suppose, by going through that kind of formal process, which I think all then kind of partially answers your question as well. You know, what's the right thing for an SME? I think that I would take the phrase SME out actually and ask the question, what is the right thing for any business? I think is it really? So I think you have to investigate these, and this is one of the things that you can go through with us if you want a kind of a quick consultation session, is actually understand perhaps the journey that's in front of you, and then try and work out what's the right answer for you as a business. So what data do you have? You know, how easy will it be for you to record information against a science-based target? You know, how possible is it for you to capture all the information and meet all the requirements under the carbon disclosure projects? Do you really want to take on a huge scope 3 exercise? Is that proportionate to the scale of your business and your operation? Because one of the things that we've talked about in previous sessions is obviously, in essence, in a lot of cases, it's actually the survey results, the testament to that is that a lot of businesses are being motivated at the moment by their supply chain. So although the larger, the big primes, the OEMs in the car industry, that the large manufacturers, the large producers of material, they will deny this, but the natural pressure that there is being created because of their own carbon disclosure projects or their scope 3 requirements, their sustainability plans, and these objectives that they're putting out into the public domain, that's trickling down now through the supply chain. And I think just making sure that you do something that's a proportionate response to that and your reasons for doing it, I think is the most important. But the answer to a lot of the questions is that there is no one size fits all for any organisation at the moment. It's just making sure that you choose something that's proportionate and appropriate for your business. And again, we can help you kind of navigate some of those choices in the early stages. Does that answer your question? Kind of.
I was going to add in as well on certainly, I'm not saying favour one over the other, but Science-Based Targets initiative kind of removes the ability for companies to do any greenwashing, for argument's sake. So I know, just for example, a simple one, a lot of people might choose a green energy tariff, but what many of you may not be aware, certain suppliers that are offering, say, a biomass-fueled electricity supply, Haven in brackets, the carbon footprint of generating electricity from biomass, if you track it back to source, is actually heavier than burning natural gas, the fossil fuel. So in line with, I guess, from a greenhouse gas perspective, whilst some people may feel they're making the right choice by choosing a green energy tariff and paying a little bit more, if they're not following and tracking the actual greenhouse gas emissions of that energy source, you'd be blissfully unaware that actually you may have made a detrimental choice where carbon's concerned. Science-Based Targets just removes all of that greenwashing and labelling, certainly that energy suppliers can tend to add on to their services or their supply contracts, so you don't end up falling foul of paying more for something that's actually not making a difference. It's a fluffy green marketing thing. So I guess coming full circles, things like science-based targets, the advantages of doing them is that it adds a lot of credibility, and it shows that externally verifying the actions and the progress that you're taking, and also the targets that you've set.
Okay, good. I think there's another question there also, again from Ord. Have you seen that one, Annette? If not, I'll quickly read it out because we're getting a bit short on time. Should you align with what your customers are doing if they choose SBTs and CDP? Should a company on the supply chain do the same, or does it matter?
I guess ultimately it comes down to what your customer's looking for. So science-based targets may be correct for your customer, and it may tick all of the boxes of what they're trying to achieve, but actually they're not looking for a science-based target from a customer, so they may not be looking for their suppliers to be setting their own science-based targets. Carbon Disclosure Project, whilst it's a good voluntary way of reporting, ultimately people can improve their scores just by improving the data, not necessarily by reducing their impact on the environment. So I guess it's just being cautious and careful, and matching up what you do with what you're trying to achieve. So if your customer says, I need a real accurate and well scrutinized strategy from you in order for you to be a supplier of ours, then you're probably going to have to go more towards science-based targets or something like B Corp. Whereas if it's just a generic thing that you want to improve and disclose, then maybe carbon disclosure projects are a better fit for the business.
Brigitte also posted a nice question about, is it not better to disclose early, as you can make quick wins and show good progress very early on?
Yeah, something that has come up in conversation quite a lot with a number of the members that I've spoken to. They're actually gutted that they've not already disclosed, because they've actually made a hell of a lot of progress and maybe took all of the quick wins out, and now they're left with all of the big heavy capital investment projects that are going to take a further chunk out of their carbon emissions. So I guess the piece of advice I gave to them was, don't be daunted by the fact that you've already made progress. Maybe report that progress that you've already made. So it's not just shouting about what you're going to do, it's shouting about what you've already done. So if you made those, those big chunks of carbon reduction, or those quick wins 2-3 years ago, just agree that against a baseline from 2015, for argument's sake, you've already reduced. And now what you're actually planning on doing is resetting a baseline from 2020, maybe not 2020 because that's COVID year. And some people were affected. But resetting your baseline, and this is what we now look to achieve moving forward. So I think it's important to review and shout about, yes, what you've already done, but then also what you're going to do, what you intend to do.
Thank you, Adam.
Very good, very good. Well, I guess it's just for me to conclude today's workshop. I do hope you found it beneficial. I know I certainly did. I've been fortunate enough to be with the team all the way through these, and I'm learning, and I'm sure many of you are too. I'd like to thank Dan from Inspired Energy for his expertise, and also to say we fully understand, we've been working from home, we've been doing this for over a year, we all still get issues, and we'll do our best to put the information out there at the end of this presentation. We'll make sure that people who've been on get a full kind of email with all the slides and everything that's available to them from yourselves. I'd like to remind everyone that the next workshop in the series is on Wednesday the 21st of July. It is back to our usual time between 1 and 2 on the afternoon, and that will cover how to set a net zero strategy. I'll be sending out again the information from today, and also the ability to register for that next session. So do hope we'll see you all again, and any questions, Dan and Adam have both offered the email address there, the Make UK Inspired Energy email address. And if anybody else has anything they want to say, Brigitte or Dan or Adam, I guess it's...
Well then, thanks everyone for putting up with my rubbish technology. Hopefully it came across okay, and it shouldn't have affected the content. Thanks Adam for stepping in where I went blank.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. There's one question just remaining unanswered, and just in the wanting to kind of not leave anything undone. So yeah, in terms of executive remuneration being linked to environmental performance, yeah, this is becoming widely commonplace now within larger corporations, and is an excellent tool in terms of gaining real traction within kind of organisations and making sure that it's a front and centre issue. I think how do you make it part of your cultural fit? I think Dan talked a little bit about this, about internal communication. I think it is really important you find that you start embedding within the culture of your organization. And one of the ways that we've talked about doing this at previous sessions is that actually, even if you're an owner manager and you don't feel that you have the time, or even perhaps even the interest in kind of sustainability and kind of this carbon net zero journey, bring somebody or use somebody else in your organization and sponsor them to be your spokesperson on the subject, and empower them to kind of start making change. And I think if people are empowered at any level within the business by the owners, the directors of the business, to try and start influencing change, they can build stakeholder groups or internally, and then start creating sustainability teams that can start breeding its own change. And I think that's something we're seeing done as a kind of a secondary line of attack, if you know what I mean.
Right. Anything to add there, Brigitte?
No, just to thank everybody again for their participating, and my colleagues for saving the polls and for doing a great presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
It's been putting people in the waiting room there.
Right.
Want to stop the recording?
Yes.